At the beginning of the last R&R, I mentioned how even though these first two seasons for the Kraken have been drastically different in just about every way, there have been a couple of similarities here cropping up towards the end. Maybe the biggest one, though, is that, much like I was saying at this time last season, this is very much not the season we expected coming in. This time, though, that's a good thing. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken do end up losing the final game of the season 3-1 to the Vegas Golden Knights, losing both of the last two games of the season to Vegas. But this last game really had no meaning to the Kraken whatsoever and did have meaning to Vegas, who, with the win, secured not only the first spot in the Pacific, but the first spot in the Western Conference. Okay, I guess for Seattle going into the game, there was still potential meaning in that if they won the game and LA lost theirs, the Kraken could jump the Kings into the third spot. But I think there's also some recognition there that by doing that, they'd probably get a harder first round matchup. But by the time the Kraken and Golden Knights started the third period, the Kings had already taken care of the Ducks, which for the Kraken made the game completely meaningless other than, I suppose, pride and 2 extra points in the standings for the history books. But Vegas, with Edmonton having won their game, was still playing for that first spot in the division and conference. Of course, the byproduct of the Kings beating the Ducks in regulation is bad news for everybody in that the Ducks lock up the best odds at Connor Bedard, but I suppose that's the future Pacific Division's problem. And I suppose since we're on the subject already, and let's be honest, we've been talking about it at the beginning of most of these R&Rs here towards the end of the season, as far as who the Kraken are going to face in this first round matchup, well, we still don't know not only who the Kraken are going to be playing, but when that series is going to start. At least at this point, though, it is narrowed down to the winner of the Central Conference, which is between either the Dallas Stars or Colorado Avalanche, which is contingent on whether or not the Avalanche beat the Predators in a makeup game because the Predators couldn't stop their arena from flooding earlier on in the season. That game happening tomorrow, or, well, today as of when you're watching this, and actually, honestly, today as of the clock, because it's a lot later than it usually is when I start recording these, thanks to the game starting late and then all the fan appreciation stuff, which was still fun. It was kind of a bummer it came after a loss, but again, like we mentioned, the game really didn't mean anything to the Kraken other than it would have been fun to win. So then when it comes to which of those two matchups between the Avs and Stars, personally, I think would be better for the Kraken and which one I'd rather see for them, well, to be perfectly honest with you, the answers to those two questions for me are kind of at odds. Personally, I'd rather see the Kraken play the Dallas Stars, mostly just because, as most of you know, in the years leading up to the Kraken starting to play games, I was an Avalanche fan, a more casual Avalanche fan than I am now a diehard Kraken fan, but I still have a soft spot for the Avs. And playoff series tend to have a way of making you hate at least part of whatever team your team is playing against. And I just don't really want any reason to hate the Avs, but I know it's going to happen if that is the matchup. That having been said, honestly, I do think that is probably the better matchup for the Kraken. And don't get me wrong, the Kraken will still definitely be the underdogs in that series. The Avalanche are the defending champs for a reason. There is a lot of star power still on that team. But part of the reason that's a better matchup for the Kraken is the Stars are healthier. Some of that star power for the Avalanche is questionable going into this first series. Makar, we don't know, and Landeskog certainly looks like he could be missing at least part of the first series, if not the entire thing, which definitely helps the Kraken as far as talent that they're facing, especially if they're missing ex-Avalanche Burakovsky. Even outside of that, though, there's the goaltending matchup where, although both Georgiev and Francouz for the Avalanche are good goaltenders and have been this season, I gotta give Ottinger the edge there. We saw what he could do in the playoffs last year, where he nearly single-handedly stole that series from the Flames for the Stars. I mean, the only reason that series even got to 7 was Ottinger, and it's not even close as far as next most valuable player on that Stars team in that series. And besides, going back the other way, well, the difference between the two teams was pretty big last year. The Avalanche lost a little bit of their star power, certainly losing Nazem Kadri hurt a bit. They still are very good, and I would take the Avalanche scoring over the Stars, But Jason Robertson has had an incredible season, and even outside of him, they still have 5 other guys that hit 70 points on the year, so this is definitely a team that can put up points as well, closing that gap quite a bit, especially if the Avalanche are missing Makar or Landeskog, or both. But that's just how these teams match up against the Kraken's strengths, which is playing 5-on-5. When it comes to the weaknesses, this is where it gets even more in the favor of the Kraken wanting to play the Avalanche. First of all, special teams. Both of the two in the Stars and Avalanche have pretty top-notch power plays. The Stars edging the Avalanche out a little bit there over the course of the season. But the Kraken penalty kill has been, again, one of the best in the NHL over the back half, so I'm not as worried about that. The power play, well, it's been improving a bit over late, has still been scuffling somewhat, and the Stars have a notably better penalty kill than the Avalanche. And then there's the biggest Kraken weakness of all, the face-off, where by percentage the Kraken finished the season second worst in the NHL, just barely edging out the Buffalo Sabres at 45.3, just 0.3 ahead of the Sabres. And when it comes to the two teams they could end up facing, the Avalanche actually aren't that much ahead of them, just 1.5% better, still towards the bottom. Meanwhile, the Dallas Stars, at nearly 55%, lead the entire NHL. Now, with that being said, and it does pretty much mean the Stars would win just about every faceoff. I mean, not literally, but they would win the vast majority. In the interest of fairness, well, faceoffs still are important for your team to be winning. Faceoff percentage doesn't necessarily mean everything when it comes to winning playoff series. After all, the Avalanche, who won the Stanley Cup last year, came into the playoffs with the 5th worst faceoff percentage in the NHL last season. And, for that matter, the 3 teams that led the NHL in faceoff percentage last season in the Toronto Maple Leafs, Dallas Stars again, and Boston Bruins all lost in the first round. So, still a path to the Stanley Cup, even if you can't win in the dot, but yeah, it would help. With that, though, I think that's enough potential playoff matchup talk for now. I'm going to end up doing a whole video on the matchup, whoever it ends up being for the Kraken, and by the time this video gets out, we're going to know who that is in just a few hours' time. So we'll save it for that one that I'll be getting out the day after we find out whether it's the Stars or the Avalanche. Besides, once again, even if it was meaningless, we still do have a game to go over here with the Golden Knights. Really, the only potential meaning, I suppose, for the Kraken that we've mentioned before was for them to be instilling good habits going into the playoffs, especially against a playoff team who still had something to play for. And as far as that's concerned, honestly, the Kraken did a fantastic job. They were easily the better team on the ice pretty much all night long, outplaying the Golden Knights pretty much from start to finish. But in the end, with it being a team from Vegas, luck was on their side. I mean, definitely the type of luck in this game that you'd want to stay at that slot machine all night if you were getting it in Vegas. They get a couple bounces, and the Kraken, I mean, Brassard was incredible in net for Vegas, not to take anything away from him. The Kraken also just could not get a bounce to go their way and hit the plumbing around Brassard? Hit the plumbing around Vegas's goaltender a number of times. And I really do mean that the Kraken dominated this game from start to finish. And to even add to that, it wasn't like this was against the Vegas B team or parts of the Vegas B team like we saw in the last one with all those guys out injured, as they got most of them back. Mark Stone still wasn't back and won't be until probably game 1, knowing Vegas. But Eichel was back, as well as a couple of the others. And for the Kraken, they did put out what's probably going to be the game 1 starting lineup with Grubauer in net and all of the usual cast in front of him. And pretty much right from the jump, they had Vegas hemmed into their end of the ice for almost the entirety of the first half of the first period, really only letting the Golden Knights out occasionally to clear the puck or maybe get a quick little peek into the Kraken end of the ice, basically long enough to get a full change and then right back into the Vegas end with a fresh wave out for the Kraken as well. More offensive zone time, and I suppose to Vegas's credit, they were doing a pretty good job of keeping the Kraken attack to the outside in the offensive end. But while that's good and all, you still do probably want to spend some time at the other end of the ice if you're Vegas, but they just were not able to do that through the first 10 minutes without even a shot on goal until just about the 10-minute mark. And to be honest, the first shot on goal for Vegas really wasn't a shot or even on goal for that matter. Unfortunately, it turns into a shot on goal on technicality because it ends up in the goal. As far as lucky bounces are concerned and reasons to stay at whatever game you're playing in Vegas if you get this kind of luck, well, this is the biggest example of it almost all season that I can think of something happening against the Kraken. As Larson gets to the puck in the corner and then rims it around behind the net, where Vince Dunn gets it cleanly behind the Kraken net without anybody really around him to challenge. And then he tries to clear it out through the zone up into the neutral zone to get another transition, but he clears it right into the crossing skate of Riley Smith, who does kick his foot out, which you'd think might be construed as a kicking motion. Certainly if it was, the first game in Kraken history, it probably would have come back for a kicking motion. But since it's Vegas, that kicking motion goes unnoticed and it kicks the puck right through the crease, where Grubauer, maybe his reflexes were a little bit slow. And to be honest, if this was a game that really mattered, I think he probably would have had his pads on the ice instead of standing when Dunn had the puck behind the net. But again, you're a goaltender with your team in clear control behind your net, so you probably don't think that it's going to end up in front of you in the near future. But it goes off of Riley's skate, right into Grubauer, and off of his pad into the net behind him. Just a series of unfortunate events that leaves Vegas with a 1-0 lead, again, with a shot on goal really only by technicality. So, yeah, that sucks and all, but at least it happens in a game that doesn't really matter for anything. Actually, at this particular point, I think the Ducks had a 1-0 lead over the Kings, so the Kraken losing wouldn't have been the end of the world, as they would have gotten that better matchup with the Central Division winner. But there's also the fact that even if you wanted the Kraken to win, they're still playing like the much better team to this point, and this is just the kind of thing that's going to happen from time to time when you, as has been said, play a sport where you whack a frozen disc of rubber around on ice with sticks. So you move on from it, and honestly, that's what the Kraken are able to do, is they just pick up right where they left off, dominating play, controlling the puck at the other end of the ice, and while they do eventually allow a legitimate shot on goal a little bit later, it's not dangerous. Grubauer makes that save, and eventually the puck, again, somehow kind of mysteriously ends up in another net. I couldn't really tell how it ended up happening, but at least this time it comes on a legitimate shot on goal, and more importantly, it's in Vegas's net, as Wennberg gets the puck along the boards off of a pass from, I think, Geekie and Schwartz. That line really had a pretty good game. Wennberg takes it back up along the boards, eventually finding Schwartz at the faceoff circle. Schwartz fires off the one-time shot, and it bounces off a couple of things and eventually settles inside the net to tie the game at 1. Schwartz picking up his 21st of the season. And if there's a guy that could strangely get hot in the playoffs, Schwartz is a legitimate candidate for that if the Kraken are going to make a deep run. Really then, at this point, it seems like the only thing that could slow down this Kraken momentum would be for the whistles to start coming out. Which, a few minutes into the second period, is exactly what happens, as Vegas is going to get the first power play of the game on one of the softest calls I've seen all season against the Kraken. It's a tripping call on Larson as he's fighting for the puck along the boards, and the guy he's fighting for that puck with just kind of falls over his stick as they both had their stick on it, which is not how tripping works, but the call's made, Larson goes to the box, and I suppose for what it's worth, the bright side here is that it's a Kraken defenseman in the box in the second period, which lately has turned into breakaways out of the box and then goals. The Kraken do end up killing off this power play, but Larson doesn't get his breakaway. Then the Kraken get a power play of their own shortly after, which they get some good chances on but don't score. And Vegas is right back to the power play. Within seconds of that power play, though, the Kraken get a call to even it up to 4-on-4. Nobody ends up scoring at 4-on-4, but as it's coming to an end, Vegas is in the Kraken end of the ice because, again, the Kraken are great at 5-on-5 and 3-on-3, but 4-on-4 just continues to be an adventure. And sure enough, an adventure it continues to be, because while Vegas doesn't score, they do get into the offensive end, and they do end up getting a delayed penalty. So even though when Sprong comes out of the box, it then sends the Kraken to, I think, like 14 seconds of a power play technically, Vegas is now on a delayed penalty, which makes it basically 5-on-5. And on that 5-on-5, they end up scoring as Grubauer makes a save, but then it bounces off of him right out to, I think it was Eichel. Then Eichel just whacks at the bouncing puck, hits it, and it bounces over Grubauer's pad. Actually, I think it hits the ice once, then bounces over Grubauer's pad, right to a guy next to the net who's able to whack at it again, and he hits it past Grubauer to get, technically speaking, a shorthanded goal for Vegas here, but it's 5-on-5, so it's a 5-on-5 shorthanded goal. Anyway, it's weird, but Vegas has a 2-1 lead. Once again, though, the Kraken continue to press and get offensive chance after offensive chance. They just cannot get anything more past Brossoit, eventually even getting another power play towards the end of the second period, which they get more opportunities on, but just can't score. We go to the third period, and honestly, in the third period at this point, during the intermission, LA officially wins, so the Kraken now officially have nothing left to play for, and they knew that, so seems like some of the energy may have come out. Now they're still getting the best of the Golden Knights, who have something to play for and just can't get anything going offensively. Granted, they have the lead, so all they really have to do is keep the Kraken from scoring. Eventually, Seattle gets one more power play, so nearly ties the game there. Eventually, though, this one does end up going... I mean, the Kraken pull the goaltender, so Vegas hits the empty net, and that's how we get to 3-1. Even with that, though, and especially as it got later and later in this game, it became more and more clear, with it more obvious that Vegas was going to get at least 1 point, which is all they needed to clinch that first spot. That these two teams knew that they had taken care of what they needed to take care of, and there was no reason to really push the envelope too much. Maybe with the one exception of Yanni Gourde and Pietrangelo, who is kind of having enough of Yanni Gourde's pestering. The two of them fight, but it's broken up quick enough where they just call it 4 minutes for roughing each, and it comes late enough in the game. I think it was like around a little ahead of the 2-minute mark. So basically the 4 minutes for roughing was sent them saying, just go away and don't come back till the end. Outside of that, though, there's one moment I can think of where Grubauer went out to play the puck behind the Kraken net and just kind of whacked it with one hand up along the boards, which is absolutely not something a goaltender would ever do in any other circumstance. I mean, there wasn't a Vegas player really around him, so it's not like it was in any immediate danger of ending up in the net, but you're never going to see a goaltender just whack the puck with one hand on his stick unless it's a poke check or something like that. Certainly not like Grubauer does here if they think there's any meaning to what they're doing. Even outside of that, though, especially whenever there was a convergence of players in front of either one of the nets, and there was a little, extra poking and prodding before the whistle, and to be fair, some of the whistles after goaltenders froze the puck were pretty late here in the third period. So there was actually, I would say, more poking and prodding than you're used to seeing. Usually that would draw quite a crowd, lots of pushing and shoving, cross-checking, getting guys away from the goaltender, and maybe even some punches thrown, even in normal regular season play. In this game, there really wasn't any of that. Sure, there would still be the extra poking and prodding until the whistle happens, but once the whistle happened, both teams would just kind of stand there and look at each other like, yeah, so we both have to play more hockey here in a few days. You guys just want to just call it a night? I think that's probably what's for the best. You know what? To give a recent reference, I'll put it this way. There was a lot more going on towards the end of this game that could lead to some chippiness and animosity between the two teams than we saw in any of the games against the Coyotes, and we saw how those games ended. This game, yeah, outside of Pietrangelo getting sick of Gourde's crap and those two going at it, there really was, about as much chippiness as you would see in a preseason game. Heck, maybe even less than that with some guys fighting for jobs in preseason games. Anyway, the game ends up finishing with that 3-1 score, so Vegas gets what they wanted and at least one more point to win the division and first seed in the Western Conference. And the Kraken, well, again, by the time LA won their game, it really didn't matter how this one went for Seattle, especially considering they played a pretty full 60 minutes and dominated it the entire time, played the type of game that if they play that way going into the playoffs, they have a very good shot of upsetting whoever they play in this first round. And when it comes right down to it, that's my big takeaway from this game for the Kraken. They played the style of game that they'll need to play in the playoffs, maybe aside from the chippiness and sticking up for your goaltender thing. That'll happen naturally, but especially 5-on-5, they played the style of game they'll need to be playing in the playoffs and played it pretty well. Again, against the top team in the Western bracket, which they can do that with the Gold Knights, they can do that with any team. Of course, yes, as much as we'll all be rooting for it to happen, I don't think too many people will be picking the Kraken to win the Stanley Cup, but crazier things have happened. The Kings won a Stanley Cup as the 8th seed back when that was a thing. Probably still should be, but that's a whole different issue. And even more recently than that, we saw the Blue Jackets, when it comes to the first round, defeat the, until this year's Bruins, winningest team in NHL history in the Lightning a couple years ago. And then a couple years after that, we saw a team that wouldn't even have made the playoffs in a normal season in the Habs go all the way to the Stanley Cup final. So, could happen. We'll just have to wait and see. As for the Kraken 3 stars, one final time in the regular season, the first star in this game, I'm giving to Jaden Schwartz. He had a fantastic game, and he's the only one that scores for the Kraken, so fairly easy pick for me there. Second star, I'm going to go with Oliver Bjorkstrand. A really good night for him. That line certainly had a much better night than they did the one a couple nights ago, or I guess in the last game. Even though Gord scored in that game and Bjorkstrand set him up for that goal, they had a real tough night defensively. That they, like I said, did not let that turn into a trend and got it turned around. Great night defensively, and Bjorkstrand had a number of chances to score, again, just stonewalled by the goaltender. And then my third star in this game, I am going to go a little off the board here. He certainly earns the star in this game, but I am also partially giving it to him because I feel a little bit bad that he really has not gotten hardly any stars from me over the course of this season. In fact, I think he only has a couple over the entire year. Part of that is because he did not play particularly well up until, say, the All-Star break, but has really come on here, especially in the last few weeks, and had a good game in this one, that being Carson Soucy. And with Soucy, even if, when it comes to the end of the season, and we'll talk about this more when that time comes, hopefully with the last game of the season for the Kraken being a win, let you figure out what that means, he probably won't be on the team next year. If he's going to get hot, now is the perfect time. And finally, before we close things out, I will go over really quickly who won the player awards, just for those who are curious and didn't see it, either weren't at the game or left early. Not too many of them were big surprises. Vince Dunn won the MVP, which I think was the right decision. Matty Beniers won the fan favorite, again, one that I was not too surprised by. The guy that got the most stars for the Kraken in home games, or I guess most stars with the weighting for first star versus third star, was Jared McCann. That makes a lot of sense based on the season he had. And then I guess maybe the one surprise, just because it's the one that's more of a wild card, because it's based on the locker room, voted on by the players, the guy that shows persistence and leadership and all that stuff. Jaden Schwartz won that one. So fun night there with those awards. And yeah, other than that, let me know what you think down in the comment section, who you'll be cheering for in this game with Colorado and Nashville that determines who the Kraken will play in the first round. And again, one more time with that, just as a reminder, if you want the Kraken to face the Avalanche in the first round, you're cheering for them to beat the Predators. And if you want the Kraken to not face the Avalanche, you're cheering against the Avalanche. With that though, if you have made it to this point, as always, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below that help support the channel, so I'd appreciate you using them. And until next time, with playoff hockey, or I suppose probably the matchup video for playoff hockey, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken!